In this video, we're going to talk about an introduction to vascular plants, and then we're going to really focus on seedless vascular plants. Vascular plants are also known as tracheophytes, and they can be either seedless or they might produce seeds. In this video, we are going to focus on the seedless vascular plants. And then in a future chapter, we'll talk more about the plants that produce seeds. And as you can see, there are several different phyla and some classes of these seedless vascular plants that we're going to talk about. Vascular plants are also called tracheophytes, and that's because they have tracheid cells that make up the vascular tissue. Vascular plants are also the dominant, most conspicuous land plants. So if you look around you, the majority of what you're seeing are going to be vascular plants. And I should erase this or remove this seedless up here because right now we're actually talking about vascular plants in general, and then we'll talk more about the seedless ones. There are over 260,000 known species of vascular plants, and 90% of Earth's vegetation is made up of these vascular plants. The sporophyte generation is the dominant part of the vascular plant life cycle. And by dominant, we just mean it's the most conspicuous, the most noticeable, and how the plant spends the majority of its time. Vascular plants are able to inhabit a wide variety of locations because of the vascular tissue that they have. They have roots that can take up water and nutrients from the soil, and these roots can kind of spread out to find the water and nutrients where needed. The vascular tissue also has this kind of tough substance known as lignin, and lignin can help the plant to grow taller. So vascular plants can essentially outcompete non-vascular plants because they can transport water and they can grow taller to get more access to sunlight for photosynthesis. There are two different types of vascular tissue in vascular plants. On this slide, we're going to talk about xylem, and on the next slide, we'll talk about phloem. Xylem are vessels, which are kind of like tubes, and the primary function of xylem is the storage and transport of water and minerals. So you can see on this picture here, we have water and minerals in the soil. And the xylem are able to take up that water and minerals through the roots and transport those nutrients to other parts of the cell, including the leaves and the stem, flowers, etc., so they can have access to that water and nutrients needed for performing their own functions. When I was a kid and I would go out and water our garden, I used to think that I had to water the leaves of the plant because that's where I thought the water needed to be. But in reality, you need to water the soil so that the xylem can take up the water and transport it to the leaves. The cells that make up this vascular tissue are known as tracheids, and these are special conducting cells. And this is how vascular plants get their name as tracheophytes. These tracheids have that tough supportive molecule known as lignin. And interestingly, the lignin is impermeable to water. So the xylem kind of acts like a straw, sucking water up and distributing it to where it needs to go without losing that water to diffusion of the cells around it. The tough nature of lignin also helps the plant to grow taller, so it almost acts as kind of like a skeleton for the plant. And this allows the plant to kind of better compete for sunlight so it can grow taller than other plants. It also helps with spore dispersal because a taller plant can release its spores, and those spores can travel over a longer distance before gravity pulls them to the ground. On this picture of a cut celery stalk, you can see these vascular bundles here. In the middle of the vascular bundle is where the xylem are. And then the kind of surrounding tubes are the phloem. And you've maybe done the experiment where if you take a stalk of celery and kind of cut off the end and put it into a glass of water with food coloring, you can actually see the food coloring getting pulled up the xylem into the other parts of the celery. You can also do this with flowers like carnations. If you get a white carnation, cut the stem so you have a fresh cut, put it in a vase with colored water, and the water will actually get sucked up into the carnation and change the color of the petals. The other type of vascular tissue is phloem. Phloem is different from xylem because its function is different. So in phloem, these vessels transport sugars and proteins, which are the products of photosynthesis. Along with other solutes from the areas of the plant where they are made to all the other areas of the plant. So remember that photosynthesis occurs in the leaves. And so these nutrients that are produced during photosynthesis, they need to be able to get to all the other cells of the plant so that the cells can do cellular respiration to extract ATP from these sugars and proteins and other molecules. So it's made here in the leaves, and then it gets transported to all the other parts of the plant. So if we look at this cross-section of a plant through a microscope, we can clearly see the xylem, so these big vessels that help to transport water throughout the plant structures. And then the phloem is this tissue surrounding the xylem, and so they're these kind of smaller tubes that are helping to transport the sugars and proteins and other solutes throughout the plant. Vascular plants have true roots. Remember that in non-vascular plants, they had these anchoring structures called rhizoids. But these rhizoids did not have vascular tissue. So they are technically not the same thing as roots. But in vascular plants, they have true roots because these anchoring kind of filaments have vascular tissue in them. Vascular tissue in roots is extremely important because it helps to absorb and transfer the water and minerals from the soil. And remember that this is primarily the function of xylem. Roots can also grow into networks and essentially grow out and around the plant in order to find water and nutrients in the soil. And this is due to that apical meristem tissue. Which is a form of stem cells that can go through mitosis and differentiate in order to either reach deep down into the soil or reach kind of shallow but further away from the plant in order to find the water and nutrients. Roots also help to stabilize the plant, so they do have an anchoring function to them. And most roots form that mycorrhizae symbiotic relationship with fungi that we talked about in a previous chapter. And one of the many kind of benefits of this symbiotic relationship with fungi is that it helps to increase surface area for absorption of those water and minerals. Vascular plants also have true leaves. And remember that leaves are the primary site of photosynthesis. So the cells in leaves have those chloroplasts, which are those organelles that have the pigments and proteins needed for photosynthesis to occur. And leaves typically have a large surface area to maximize how much light that they can capture. And if you recall the reaction of photosynthesis, remember that plants take carbon dioxide and water. And then there are several steps that kind of happen in between, but there's also this kind of input of solar energy. And then the outputs are oxygen gas and carbohydrates. And then these carbohydrates can be transported throughout the plant to the other parts of the plant that don't conduct photosynthesis so that they can do cellular respiration in order to make ATP. So this reaction we looked at here, this is our photosynthesis reaction. And we could draw a reverse arrow to represent cellular respiration. Which gives off energy in the form of ATP molecules. There are two types of leaves. There are microphylls and megaphylls. Microphylls are smaller, so if we draw kind of a little cartoony leaf here, and they have a single unbranched vein going through the middle of the leaf. Megaphylls are larger, and in addition to a single vein going through the leaf, they also have these kind of branched veins going out through the leaf itself. Sporophylls are another type of leaf. It's actually a modified leaf that produces sporangia. And sporangia are just these structures that contain spores. And you can see them on the picture here. These sporophylls are associated with true ferns, conifers, and flowering plants. And we'll talk about the conifers and flowering plants in more detail when we talk about the vascular plants that produce seeds. But later in this lesson, we are going to talk about the true ferns, and we'll be talking more about what we see in the picture here, because this is the underside of a fern frond.